If you're new to portrait photography, you might have heard or seen the term key light being used and wondered what a key light actually is. Now, a key light refers to the purpose of one of the lights in a portrait lighting setup. It doesn't really refer to the type of light or the type of modifier used on the light. It refers to the purpose. And you probably know that a lighting setup, whether it's for photos or video shoot, can consist of several different lights serving different purposes. You can have background lights and hair lights, fill lights, rim lights, but the key light is the most important light in any portrait setup. It's the foundation of the lighting for your portrait. See, when we're making a portrait, we're trying to give the viewer a sense of the shape and contours and sometimes even the texture of the different parts of the subject's form. And that usually means the head and shoulders area, unless we're featuring more of the body. It's the way the key light and shadows fall across the subject that give the viewer that sense of what the subject actually looks like. This is specifically the role of the key light. The key light should provide the most visual information about the subject, while the other lights in the lighting setup play supporting roles. In a one-light setup, the one light is usually your key light, and that makes sense. And I generally recommend that new photographers learn how to light for portraits using only one light, and then add more lights later when you understand how to use that one light as your key light. Key lights can be constant lights or flash lighting, and you can use a key light with or without a modifier. But for the most part, photographers like to use some type of diffusion instead of bare lighting. This helps to create a larger and softer looking light pattern, which can be more flattering to the subject. A flash or a strobe with a softbox or shoot-through umbrella modifier is the common setup. The position of your key light in relation to your subject is important. The effect of the lighting is going to be determined by the distance and the angle of the light, by the subject's orientation to the light, and possibly by the camera position. All right, now that you know what a key light is, you'll need to learn the different techniques on how to use one. There are also 4 or 5 traditional portrait lighting patterns that you should be aware of. These are the short, broad, butterfly, split, and Rembrandt patterns. And these lighting patterns are all created by the key light. You can learn all about these in videos that I'm going to link to here and in the description. But here's a straightforward technique that you can start practicing with right away. Just place your light about 45 degrees to one side of the camera to subject axis. And you can position your light to point down toward your subject about 45 degrees, and you are ready to go. Start with this and experiment with slightly different angles to see how the light and shadows affect the look of your subject. And don't forget to at least familiarize yourself with some of the traditional lighting patterns and what they're used for.
And by the way, I cover each of these setups from one light portraits all the way to multi-light builds in detail inside Flash Portraits Made Simple. So if this is starting to click for you, my course is really going to help solidify these concepts.
Portrait photographers rely heavily on what we call a fill light. The fill light, or fill, is a contrast-reducing light in a portrait lighting setup. It's called a fill light because it literally fills in the shadows created by the primary light in our setup, which is our key light. The fill light can be any type of light that does the job of adding illumination to the shadow side of the subject. It can be a light similar to your key light, just less intense. It can be modified with a softbox or umbrella. You can even use a reflector instead of an actual light source to bounce other lights onto your subject to create the fill. Portrait and video lighting setups can consist of several lights, all with different roles to play. The key light is the primary light and the first light you should be concerned with. Other lights in our setup can include background lights, hair lights, and rim lights. But it's the key light that gives us the most information about the subject's form, while the fill light helps fill in the dark shadows on the opposite side of the key light. By doing this, we reduce the contrast on the subject, and this can help soften the look of the light and shadows. You might be familiar with the idea that the larger your light source, the softer the light. And that's why a big softbox up close to your subject can produce a really nice, gentle transition from light to shadow, which results in a softer look than, say, a bare flash. The large area of the softbox's front panel reaches more areas around the subject's form. But you can think of a fill light as a way to extend that reach of light further around the subject. Conceptually, it's like making the key light even bigger. And again, bigger light is softer light. In a two-light setup, the primary light is going to be your key light, and the second light is the fill light. Now, here's a typical two-light setup. First, you'll place your key light, and make sure your key light is producing the lighting pattern that you want. Next, bring in a fill light, and we usually place this opposite side of the key and a little lower against the subject. The purpose of the fill light is not to eliminate the shadows that the key light creates. The purpose of the fill light is to soften those shadows by adding in a little additional light to that side. So, the fill light is relatively less intense than your key light. You might set it up to throw only about half the amount of light as the key light. The actual ratio of light intensity between the key light and the fill, that affects the contrast on your subject. Now, you can use a light meter or some other method to dial in a precise lighting ratio, but you can also estimate and take some test shots until you see the amount of fill that you want. And once your light power and distances are set, you're good to go. Keep in mind that it's not just the power of the light that determines its intensity and effect on the subject. The distance from light to subject, the modifier used, and the light used, these can all affect the look and intensity of that light. You'll have to experiment with your setup to find the general placement and power settings that work best. And once you figure that out, just use the same placement and settings each time as your starting point for similar portrait shoots. In the typical multi-light portrait setup, the key light serves as the foundation. This is the light that creates the predominant light and shadow pattern for the portrait. The fill light is also important because it helps control contrast by filling in the shadows to some extent. These two lights generally illuminate the camera-facing sides of the subject. Kicker lights and hair lights, on the other hand, have a special job, and these are accent lights that help separate the subject from the background and just generally make the subject pop a little. By highlighting the edges and contours of the subject starts to look more three-dimensional on an otherwise flat plane. Kickers and hair lights don't take up as much space in the image as the key and fill, but they do tend to be much brighter because they're more intense and specular in nature. Any type of light and modifier can be used to create kicker and hair lighting, and there's no rule about how these lights are positioned against the subject. But generally speaking, the hair light is placed almost directly above the subject's head and aimed down to illuminate the top of the head and shoulders without affecting the face. The hair light is often modified with a small or medium-sized softbox. Kicker lights can be placed somewhere behind the subject with or without a modifier. It just depends on the situation. The idea is to create a strong reflection off the subject's contours so that you get a highlight around the edge of the figure. And there could be more than one kicker or rim light in a lighting setup, but for a traditional portrait, a single highlight on the side of the subject that might otherwise fade into the background is good. In a three-light setup, the primary light is going to be your key light. The second light is the fill light, and the third light is usually an accent light, which highlights the hair, a contour, or both. The three-point lighting setup is often described this way, using three physical lights, but think of it more conceptually, where any number of group light sources can take on the roles of the key, the fill, and the hair/rim light. Here's a typical three-point lighting setup. First, you'll place your key light so as to produce your intended foundational lighting pattern against the subject. Next comes the fill light, placed opposite the key and a little lower against the subject. And this light is usually dialed down to be less intense than your key light. I'd say about half the power of the key light is a good starting point. Finally, place the hair or kicker light, and you'll typically use a higher power setting on this light because, again, you're trying to create a somewhat specular highlight.
Now, in order to be able to do any of this stuff, you've got to work on your lighting skills. So if you're ready to take the next step, I've got a course called Flash Portraits Made Simple that walks you through all of that, from setting up your first light to building confident, creative lighting setups that you can use anywhere. Flash Portraits Made Simple is built for photographers who want to feel confident with Flash, even if they've struggled with it before or they're just getting started. Inside, I walk you through all the fundamentals: off-camera flash setups, exposure settings, working in TTL and manual, plus how to build 5 of the most useful lighting patterns with just one flash. You'll see exactly how I do it in my own home studio and how you can do the same in your space, even if it's small. I've stripped out all the fluff and made it really easy to follow so you're not spending hours trying to decode technical jargon or watch 5 different videos to figure out where to start. You're also going to get bonus guides and cheat sheets to speed things up And the course is on demand so you can learn at your own pace and refer back to it anytime. And of course, it's backed by my 30-day money-back guarantee, so there's no pressure, no risk. So if you're ready to take control of your lighting and start creating portraits that you're proud of from your home studio, just click the link below to get started, and I'll see you inside.
All right, thanks for watching, and don't forget to subscribe, like, and comment. See you next time.